All right, the recording is started. And I guess it would be helpful if I started the display as well. So today's going to be pretty informal. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we go. My objective is to get everybody up to speed on the IG publishing framework, specifically for the clinical genomics IG, but this is potentially relevant for other implementation guides as well. Instructions on how to get set up are found on the wiki. Let me zoom this just a little bit. So in the center section on FHIR development, about halfway down, you'll see IG publisher documentation. From there, it'll sort of walk you through a number of steps. The first one that's important is getting the publisher up and running. And let me just does it really not say that? That's okay. So there's different instructions for Windows and Unix. So you will need to install Ruby, and you will need to install Jekyll, because the IG publisher runs both of those. They are usually pretty straightforward to install. If you have issues, you can contact me or Graham, and we'll do our best to help you out. Once you've done that, if you're using a framework like we have for clinical genomics, you don't necessarily need to read too much about how do you use the configuration file, because using the process that we have set up for clinical genomics and a few other implementation guides, it takes care of that for you. But if you're wanting to customize the framework, then you may need to actually mess around with this. So you can certainly read this documentation to see what the process looks like. Is that readable for people? Or is that too small?
A little bit small, too small.
All right. Windows does not make it super easy to change.
Okay. I think I got the zoom in for 100%, so it's good for me.
You can do that. All right. Yeah. It would be nice if there was a Control Plus on the Windows File Explorer, but there is not. So if it's readable and if you can zoom, then that's probably best. So this is the implementation guide. The implementation guide is hosted here on GitHub. So you can submit pull requests or commit changes. Right now we don't have any particular policies around that, other than anybody who's a committer needs to have agreed to follow the committers stream on Zulip, chat.phir.org, and also has agreed to abide by Chapter 16 of the GOM. But we don't have any rules other than that yet. The content is split into two folders. There's a framework folder and a source folder. That's where all of our stuff lives. Source generated gets run as part of the build process, but that's not something we necessarily need to pay attention to. And then we just have a couple of scripts. I've created scripts for Windows, but if you don't run Windows, if you run a Mac, somebody else is free to check in a shell script that does the same thing. I can't test it, so I didn't bother creating one. Kicking that off does a little bit of setup stuff, not much. In this case, there was nothing to do. It goes and grabs the current validation pack from the publication folder, and then it reads through our source files, checking all of telling you what resources it's looking at as it goes. So if it blows up, you have a sense of what it was trying to process when it did blow up. It then starts spitting out our output in the output folder. So output folder is what the actual publication website looks like. Temporary folder is just used as part of the publication process. There's nothing in there that you should ever need to look at. Source generated is a set of files that can be re-retrieved or generated by the build process, but it'll take longer. So if you need to, you can wipe the source generated folder. It contains a cache for terminology. It contains the schemas, and it contains a few generated files produced by pre-processing. So generally you won't have to mess around with this, but that's what it's for. It's still generating output. That should finish in another 30 seconds or so. Entire build process takes about 2 minutes. It is possible to run this in a continuous process. If you run gen continuous, it'll actually watch for changes in the source files, and every time you save, it will kick off an incremental build, only dealing with things that have changed, which means that you can save a change, and about 10 seconds later, you can see it in the published specification. The published specification. Go ahead.
So Lloyd, can you remind me again which of these scripts you're running right now? Are you running the Gen continuous or Gen 1?
I'm running the Gen 1s.
Okay, thank you.
So it's finished. So essentially what's happening behind the scenes is we read in all of our resources from source, validate that they are in fact valid resources, generate narratives for the ones that don't have any. Then we generate a whole bunch of different outputs. The outputs are essentially the rendering of each of the resources. So if I bring the published version over here, and we go look at our artifacts and go take a look at one of the profiles, it's going to generate this summary view, this differential view, this snapshot view, It's also going to generate this list of terminology bindings, this list of constraints, this table of detailed descriptions, this table of mappings. So each of those are outputs of the publication process. It also generates a few summary files that give you a summary of all of the extensions and stuff like that. And once it's done that, it runs a Jekyll, which is a static website publication process that uses some templates together with all of the files that have been generated here to stitch together the website. And then when it's done that, it grabs all of the HTML files, double checks them for broken links and stuff like that, and puts together our final publication. You'll see that it tells us we've got 22 errors, 2 warnings, and 18 info messages. If you look in the output QA file, it'll actually tell you what all of those are. All of the issues that we currently have are actually, well, some of them are problems with the build process, some of them are things that we just haven't figured out yet. So this warning is something weird that's happening with Graham's terminology server. He knows about it. These information messages just say, by the way, I was grabbing stuff from spreadsheets and this is what I found in the spreadsheets. You can double check that to make sure that it's finding everything you're expecting it to. The errors, 2 of the link value sets that we reference are not in the source that Graham has for LOINC yet. And so therefore he identifies them as errors, but these links actually work. There are actually value sets there, so it's a question of Graham's source not being up to date or LOINC not having formally published everything in their official terminology files that they have published on their website. These question mark ones are places where we have said we need to have a code, but we haven't figured out what that code's going to be yet. And of course, that legitimately complains as being not valid. So all of the other problems that were here in the initial drafts of the implementation guide have been cleaned up. But if you're ever wondering what these errors, warnings, and info messages are, that's where you go to find them. So let's go take a look at source. We have a data folder, which currently has nothing in it, just a file that tells GitHub that it should actually still create this folder. There are times using this framework when you might want to have something there, but we don't need anything there. We have a single example, which is this diagnostic report. We have a number of images. These are all of the PNG files that we've been looking at in our Google document. We also have the source for those images. And actually, we don't need all of those. The only one that's currently being used is CG Unified. I should get rid of these other 2, because those are from old versions of the spec, which we're not using anymore. The includes folder just contains what we want our menu to look like. So the menu, which shows up at the top of the screen, gives us our home page and our table of contents and our artifact index and a pointer to the FHIR specification. You'll see here that we've got this bit of gobbledygook. This is a Jekyll reference pointing to a variable. As part of the build process, the IG publisher will spit out a file that contains a bunch of information, including what is the path to the version of FHIR that we're building against. And if we go and look in temp and look in pages data, we will actually see a JSON file called FHIR, and that's what it's making a reference to. So FHIR.path is going to give us this. FHIR canonical points us to the full URL for our implementation guide, and there's other information in here that we do refer to a few different places in some of our framework stuff, and occasionally in some of our other files. So if we wanted to change what our main menu looks like, that menu.xml file is what we would change to change what's showing up here. This one I can make bigger, so I will. The actual set of pages that we have defined in the implementation guide are found here. So index.xml is the content for our root page. So this implementation guide is not fully complete, blah, 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 is exactly what shows up on our home page. So that little pink-ish box comes from this block quote saying that it's a Standard for Trial Use note, and that's a style or a class that is part of FHIR's style sheet. So this is just a XHTML div element. It's fully valid XHTML. All of the header stuff, the footer stuff, the section numbers, the little linky icon thing, the table of contents, all of that gets generated as part of the publication process. So we don't have to worry about that. All that we have to do is make sure that we've got headings. The preference is that we put an anchor in front of each heading so that it has a named location. If we don't do this, it'll just get a name of 1 or 1.1, which is not something that's necessarily going to remain the same from version to version. Whereas if we give it a named anchor point, that's much more likely to remain consistent. Everything else is fairly simple XHTML styles. So unordered lists, tables, headings, paragraphs is really all that we build our implementation guide on, and the style sheet takes care of how all of the other things look. Embedded within here, you will see lots of references to site.data.fhir.path, because here we're pointing to hyperlinks to the underlying FHIR specification. So these are parts of FHIR that you should read in order to understand this specification. Here we're pointing to the various resources that we're leveraging.
Lloyd, you're using XML Spy to create and edit these, but you can use really any XML editor, or even just the text editor like VI to do this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, the content needs to be valid XHTML. It does get run through it transform, so if it's not completely valid, it's going to yell at you and blow up. But you can edit it using whatever your favorite XHTML tool is. It's also possible to have pages coded using Markdown. The CG.ig is not currently configured to do that because I don't like things that I can't validate, and I can't validate Markdown. But that is an option for workgroups that perhaps prefer to use Markdown markup instead of XHTML. So we have no worries. We have a number of pages. So we've got our root page, which is called index. We also have a background page and a cytogenomics page and a general page and a few others. And we've defined the links to those. So we actually have our little table of contents, which says what are the different pages that we have and what shows up in each of those. And that gets rendered here. So the content of our background page, the zoom doesn't work from page to page when you're running locally. It does when you're running on the website. So that background page that we just linked to is this content here. So if you want to flesh that out more or add in some diagrams or whatever, you can absolutely do that just by editing this page and including your image references and making sure that your images are in the images folder and your images source have whatever the source is for maintaining those images. The other thing, so in terms of content for RIG, most of it lives in page content and resources. Resources we're currently maintaining using spreadsheets because we have had some challenges with Forge and because maintaining the raw XML view is a bit of a pain. So spreadsheets is a happy medium. We may eventually migrate away from the spreadsheets, but this is what we're using right now. They are XML files, but they're actually XML files that are Excel. So you really don't want to edit them in XML Spy. That would be not wise. But if you do a right click and say open with Excel, then you'll get a nice spreadsheet view that looks like this. And this is how we maintain the different profiles from the implementation guide. So this is our observation described variant profile. The root of that is observation, and we're basing this on the computable genetic finding profile. If you remember from our hierarchy diagram, that's what showed up there. We then say that we must have an observation code. So it's 1-to-1, and must support is yes. And that code needs to match this pattern. So there needs to be at least one coding that has a system of LOINC and a code of 69548-6. It's fine if we have other codings as well. This is the short name that we want to show up, and this is the definition. We could include requirements or comments or additional mappings, etc. There aren't any mappings for code because it's essentially a fixed value. There are mappings to the V2 spec for the value codable concept. And if we go into the specification, and we go to artifacts, and we want to go to described variant, I think that's where we were. Yep. We will see in the differential table that it's declaring exactly what we said. So code, minickers of 1-to-1, short label of genetic variant assessment, long description, shows when you do a flyover. It also shows up if you click on it. That gives us our definition. And this is our pattern. So it shows up in XML here, and it shows up in, when you're running locally, it also doesn't remember. Actually, I don't have to run locally, but wait a moment.
So Lloyd, really quick question. Differential table, that's how this profile is different from the resource?
This is
that what that is?
this is how this profile is different from the parent profile. So we
On the
actually have a
parent profile.
hierarchy. So this profile is based on CG observations. And well, that's kind of weird. CG observations shouldn't be derivable from CG observations. Oh, I see what happened. So we've got the name of the profile is wrong. Let's go fix that right now. So this is computable genetic finding. So let's come here and find computable genetic finding. That's okay there. So we actually need to go fix this in the root source folder. This is our implementation guide. And this maintains our list of all of the artifacts and organizes them into packages. So we have some basic metadata about what the name of the implementation guide is, and that it's a universal implementation guide, and that we're using the current version of FHIR. We point to the spreadsheets that we want loaded, and then we've got a package called general profiles with a bunch of resources in there. And then we've got another package called somatics and some other stuff like that. And if I go find the computable one, computable genetic finding, why is that? Not showing up here. There might be a tooling bug actually. I will chase that down, but this should here say this is derived from computable genetic findings, and then you click on this and you do actually go to computable genetic finding, which in turn is derived from CG observations, which in turn is based on the observation resource. So that is the full hierarchy of constraints that we're dealing with.
Thank you.
No worries. Good question. So yeah, this content that we put in the spreadsheet is what shows up here in our differential view. The snapshot view gives us a complete view of the resource with all of those changes applied. So we haven't said anything about ID or meta or implicit rules or all these other things that we inherit from observation, and actually observation inherits further from domain resource and then from resource. So all of these things are there. The first thing that we talk about is we say that we slice based on, which can be referenced to all sorts of things, and we say that we need to have support for a reference to diagnostic request, and we actually inherit that from our general observation profile, because that's something we want to happen for all of our observations, is that they can point to the CG profile for diagnostic request, and the same thing for status, and the same thing for category. So a bunch of these things are defined in higher level profiles than this one. So it shows those here. It does not show them in the differential table because they're not things that are specific to the described variant profile. If we come back to the spreadsheet, one of the things that we're doing here is, this actually isn't needed. We are slicing observation component by the pattern on the code element. So we're going to have a whole bunch of components, and we're going to figure out what the set of rules are based on the pattern in this column that is set on the code component property of the component resource. So this basically says, hey, we're going to slice this component thing, and here's how. And then we list our slices. So the first one we're going to call gene studied, and it's going to be an observation component, and we can have a maximum of one of those, and we'll give it a name, whoops, and a definition. We're going to set a pattern for the component code. You have to have a code, and it has to have a pattern that looks like this. And if it does, then your value is going to be a codable concept. And we don't yet have a vocabulary binding for genes. I haven't tried to define that terminology yet. Then we've got another slice, which is chromosome location, which is another component. And again, we can have a maximum of one of those. And it's going to have a code pattern that looks like this. And we use patterns because we don't want to constrain out the possibility of having other terminologies. If somebody wants to send a SNOMED code as well, or a local code or whatever, that's totally fine. But from a validation perspective, what we care is that at least one of the codings is a LOINC code with this particular value. So we go through and we list all of our different components that we want to have. Many of them, all of them are codable concepts. If we go look at described variant, you'll see there that not all of them are codable concepts, I believe. We've got something else. Yeah, yay. So allelic frequency is actually a quantity, and we drill down a little bit further and we say, by the way, the units of measure for that quantity have to be UCOM and have to be percent, because that's how frequency is asserted. So we can tighten things down as we need to, and we can override the short display names and the definitions and whatever else we want to. We can provide mappings, and we could provide mappings to other things if we wanted to as well. So that's how all of this is maintained. There's a list at the front of the spreadsheet called metadata that basically says, here are all of the tabs that are published structures, so profiles that we want to have. I actually have a few tabs in here that are holdovers that we're not wanting to expose. So to essentially comment them out, all I have to do is remove this published structure piece here, and then it will ignore this tab, so I can still leave it there, that we can bring it back later if we want to. Did that for discrete and structural variants as well. This extension URI, this is the prefix that will show up on any extensions that we define here. If we scroll way to the end, we have a whole lot of observations in Genomics. But we have a single extension here. We called it recommended action, but the full URL for recommended action is going to be HL7.org/FHIR/UV/CG/structure definition/OBS dash, and the code that we have for the extension, recommended action. So this is defining one of the extensions that we're going to use. We don't have to list that in the metadata tab because it's a special name called extensions. We haven't bothered to define any search criteria or operations yet, so we don't have to worry about those. We have defined a bunch of bindings. So wherever we have a binding of to do, that's set to unbound. but we have a bunch of other bindings, and those point to specific value sets that are published by Loink, and we can set what the strength of them is. We've listed all of these as required. If we were to add another one, we would have to add it to this table, or the build process would get mad at us. And that, overall, is the implementation guide. There's one, we have a vocabulary folder, but we haven't actually put anything in it yet. We haven't started to define our own our own value sets or code systems. We're probably going to get to that. I don't know that we're going to get to that before we publish in March. There's also a properties folder, and that just lists a couple of configuration things for the implementation guide. So the code for our IG is CG. Copyright is 2017 and on. This is our business version. We will change this to 1.0 before we publish. We're building off of the current version of the specification. We would change this as well. So when we publish for the May implementation guide, this would actually change to say hl7.org/FHIR/2018 May. And we do have the ability to say, I don't want to see XML or JSON or Turtle renderings. We haven't bothered to do that. That tends to not be something that we would ever constrain in international implementation guides, but it could be set in other local implementation guides. So that is an overview of the publishing mechanism. There is also this framework folder. You don't need to come in here and mess around ever, unless you're wanting to actually change how the build process works or change the layout of things. So when we run the process, when we kick off this gen-once.bat, what it's actually doing is it's running an Ant script, which is here. And there's a local copy of Ant defined, so you don't have to bother installing that. The includes folder has what are the start of all of our pages looks like. So what are the style sheets that we want to have? What icons do we want when this is rendered? So the fact that we see our IG name and IG version and IG status in the header for all of our pages, that stuff is coming from this page begin fragment. So in general, there should be no need to come around and mess with this. Everything that you might need to mess with is already defined in the source folder. But if for whatever reason we decided that we wanted the Genomics implementation guide to use purple rather than red as our color scheme, that's where we could go to start to make some of those changes. Similarly, if we go into the templates folder, we have a set of templates for different pages in the specification. So this is the home page when we're going to look at a profile. And if we open that in XML Spy, this is where we say that we're going to have a detailed description, or a content tab and a detailed descriptions tab and a mappings tab and an examples tab and XML and JSON and Turtle. And then we're going to have official URL. And then we're going to have the formal views, so the text summary and the differential table and the snapshot table, all of the things that show up here. So content, detailed descriptions, mapping, examples, XML, JSON, turtle, and down here, text summary, differential table, snapshot table. All of that stuff comes from that templating mechanism. So it's actually possible to design implementation guides that look very different using exactly the same framework. Actually, let me pop up one to just give people a sense of what's possible. So this is an implementation guide that uses exactly the same framework. But this is what it looks like. So different setup for the menus. They actually have an additional component that they choose to show that we haven't chosen to show, which is called grid view. But their source is organized exactly the same as ours. So they have a resources folder, they have a page content folder. They actually have a few different implementation guides, but same basic principles as what we have for the Genomics IG. So that's what you would be manipulating if you needed to come in and change a cardinality. You would just go and open the relevant spreadsheet. The spreadsheets are organized by resource, so there's one for all of the observation profiles, one for all of the diagnostic report profiles, of which there's only one, etc. And you would just come and find the element that you wanted to change the cardinality of and change the cardinality. If you want to talk about something new here, let's say we wanted to say something about the normal range for observation. So let's go look at the FHIR spec. What would be fun to play with? Let's say that we wanted to say that comments are actually something that we want to make supported when we're looking at an overall chromosome observation. So we would say observation.comment. There's no help here. If you mess up how you spell this, it's not going to tell you in Excel. It will, however, blow up the build. It'll yell at you and say, you said comment with only one M, and I don't know what that is, so go fix it. And we'll say that this is a 0 to 1, which is actually not actually saying anything because that's the default, but we will say it's must support, and our short name is going to be test. We'll save that, and yes, I do want to save it as a spreadsheet. And then we will come back to the root folder, and we will say we want to gen this thing, and it will kick off on my other screen. And it's going to chug through. It takes a little while to load the validation pack because this loads every single resource value set, list of pages that are valid, etc. in the current version of the FHIR specification. So loading that into memory takes a little while. By the way, you do want to have a decent amount of memory on your machine to run this process. How much memory am I taking right now? Actually, that's not too bad. Yeah, so this is taking about 1.5 gig right now, which is less than Chrome is taking, which is 2 gig. I have too many tabs open.
So So Lloyd, while this is building, so a general pattern to manage this IG would be someone would make a fork of the current IG, clone that into their laptop or whatever, work on it, push it back to their fork, and then do a pull request for pulling your changes in. And then we'd have to manage how those pull requests are acted on. Would that be a reasonable way of doing that?
Yeah. I'd rather, I mean, in terms of changes to the HTML content, that'll work just fine. If we're going to have multiple people working on the spreadsheets, I would rather that we coordinated so that we don't have to merge, because merging spreadsheets is painful. It is XML, it is theoretically possible, but it's not fun or pretty. And if we can manage to avoid doing that, that will make everybody's lives easier. That's one downside of using the spreadsheets to maintain things in, but it's significantly easier than maintaining the files by hand. Hopefully soon we'll be able to move to using Forge, which stores things directly as XML, and that will merge relatively nicely. But for now, while we're still using spreadsheets, it would be best for us to just coordinate who's working on profiles and make the changes, and not have to worry about.
I'd have to fork and merge and things like that.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. But for the narrative parts, like for the XHTML stuff, we could do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions about the processor?
Are these spreadsheets compatible to Google Docs? Can we load it to Google Docs and manipulate them there and download them again from Google Docs, or will it break?
It will. I think that should work, but I'm not sure anybody's tried it. I mean, there's no fancy formatting or anything that we're dependent on. We care about basically just the values in the cells and the names of the tabs. So in theory, that should work just fine. I mean, you have to make sure that you check in the XML version. But so long as you do that, it should theoretically work. Guess the only thing to do is try and see what happens.
Okay, because this would be easier than merging Excel XML, I think.
Oh, in terms of having multiple people playing with the spreadsheet, yeah. I mean, if that works, if we find that that doesn't cause us a problem, then that's absolutely an approach that we could take. So here is our new element that we've added in, which isn't technically a new element, it's just an element that was already on observation that we've decided to say something about. And I will quickly go and remove that before I forget and check it in by accident. Other questions?
Hi, Lloyd. I have a question about some documentation text things. Like, I wonder if it should be edited in a Google documents and then before you change in the code, because I think it's like using the Google document is it's good. It's better to get more comments from other people and see how's and see other people think about what's the documents like.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely possible to, for example, where's my cursor? To do a copy and paste of this page into Google Docs and let people go and edit and comment on and whatever. And then when there's some degree of consensus around the content, somebody just needs to come take the Google document content and turn it into clean XHTML. So one of the challenges, if you just do Google Docs save as XHTML, there'll be a whole whack of Google styles embedded, which we don't want. We want clean, tidy XHTML with no styles. And we also need to do things like embed the code that needs to show up in front of the FHIR path reference or the path to the FHIR specification and that kind of stuff. So there is some work in going back and forth between the two representations. It's not sort of an automated process where we could just edit in Google Doc and do a save as XHTML and be good to go. There will be a whole bunch of migration of taking the Google Doc content and turning it into XHTML that we can actually use with the publisher process. But if that's a mechanism that the committee finds useful for developing content, that's certainly something that we can do.
So one of the things that we're talking about is how to take the material inside of our current implementation guidance and include it into this implementation guide, so we just have a single document. Mm-hmm. Do you have any rules of thumb or things we should consider when we do that? I mean, how to organize it? I mean, in terms of profiles or narratives or references and things like that. And that.
So I mean,
just general thoughts. I mean, nothing specific. I just kind of how to merge, because that's a really different kind of document than this is. But we want to incorporate a lot of that narrative in here.
Yeah. So I mean, this currently has a proposal for how to organize the content in terms of having a background section and focus sections on different types of reporting. I think we need to get some agreement that, yes, that's a reasonable backbone that we want to work with. And it's perfectly fine with me if we want to change that backbone to be something different. And then once we got agreement of, yes, this is sort of the set of pages that we want and how we want them organized, then it'll just be a question of looking at the original guidance and figuring out what parts of it are still relevant because they just explain genomics in general or talk about key concepts that are no different in the new IG than they were in the old one, and which parts are sort of superseded because we've changed our approach to profiling and we're now using components rather than extensions and have a different number of profiles that are named different things. And so some of that content may not make sense to bring across. But everything that does make sense to bring across, I mean, if there's content that makes sense to include in background or even replace some of what's here in background, or certainly bringing across some of the graphics and other things, that can just be done. My leaning would be for somebody to take a stab at doing that first, and then throw it up on Google Docs for people to comment and review, rather than having the group try to take on that merge as a group. I think it makes more sense for an individual to do that work, and I'm happy for whoever wants to do that to take that on.
Sure. And in the current implementation guidance, there's a number of code snippets on how to use, this extension or that sort of thing, or even like blocks of code. Now, I can see a lot of that being put into examples, but even like the code snippets, would that be put into examples, or would you encourage that into the implementation guide itself?
So, so for example,
like if you go to HLA, if you go to HLA for the implementation guidance, I'm not sure if that's if you have that, it's for number 7. So if you scroll, I don't know, should be okay. So so there's like picture. No, that's not it. There's like pictures like this, for example, that we may want to, for the code snippets or something like that. I'm not sure if we want, how we incorporate that into an IG.
Yeah, I mean, the diagrams
you would change it, obviously.
Cells would need to change.
Yes.
This explanation of, by the way, here's how references work. I don't know. I mean, the challenge is really how much guidance that is really just general. This is how FHIR works. Do we embed in our IG versus saying, go read this section, this section, this section of the course specification, and possibly propose some updates to the course specification to include a diagram that looks exactly like this in the section on referencing.
Yeah, and if the spec changes, then we'd have to change the code or the examples in here, these figures.
Exactly. I mean, some of the basics around how does referencing work hopefully are past the point where they're likely to change.
Right.
But it's more a question of, and maybe what we do is we say we're going to have a quick FHIR primer section on our IG that isn't really genetic specific, but covers a smattering of the key concepts to FHIR implementation to get somebody up and running quickly. The only downside of that is that may lead people to read only the quick and dirty stuff and not understand where the content lives in the main specification, where there can be more nuance and guidance that they really should actually be familiar with.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely something that implementation guides can do. Whether it's something that implementation guides should do is an excellent discussion for chat.phir.org. And I mean, we have a growing challenge with FHIR that the capabilities of FHIR continue to get bigger and bigger, and therefore the amount of content that a brand new implementer needs to wade through is potentially larger and larger. And maybe it's time for us to have some pages in the course specification that give you a quick and dirty primer of things. And that certainly the intention in the course specification is that this developer's introduction to FHIR does try to cover that notion of how do you do different things and how to presume they've got something in here. Actually, I'm not sure that they do. So maybe it's that we want to add a section on references to this FHIR overview for developers, or one or two other things from our guidance document that isn't really genomics specific, and put that in the developers section, and then just call out the developer section as you need to go take a look at this before you can really understand this IG.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So we are at the end of our scheduled time. Are there any other questions about the IG framework? Obviously, you can continue to ask questions as you try to use it or run into problems or whatever. But any last questions people want to ask today? All right, so go forth, grab it off of GitHub, try getting it to build. You'll have to make sure that you've got Java installed, obviously, and grab Ruby and Jekyll. But then you should be able to get it to build locally, and once you can get it to build locally, you can play around, get a feel for how things work, and then we can talk about how to coordinate the editing of the IG content best within the workgroup.
Great. Thank you very much, Lloyd.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.